Hello and welcome everyone to the Tech Sharmit podcast. Today I am here with another special guest, Liam Barry Allan. Liam is a software developer, GitHub Star, and one of the well-known IBM Champion. Not only this, he is the brilliant mind behind the code for IBMI, which I'm sure many of us use for IBMI development on VS Code. In fact, he enjoys sharing his knowledge of technology with all those who are interested and passionate about moving the IBMI system forward. So, today in this episode, we will talk about his journey and also discuss the projects he has implemented so far. But before we start, I'd like to thank Liam for joining us today. And now I request you to please initiate the discussion by telling us something about yourself.
Something about myself. Okay. Well, outside of work, I really enjoy being at the beach, and I really have taken up a new hobby of reading, which I didn't do a lot of before this year, but now I'm pretty much an avid reader. Usually I'm doing like one or two a week, which is cool at the moment. Trying to learn new hobbies outside of being at my desk all the time, basically, is what's new for me this year.
Okay, so which book you are reading right now? Is there any
Oh,
specific?
I'm reading The Conquest of Gaul, which is about basically Roman time conquer,
Okay.
wars in Gaul, basically, and it's quite interesting. It's kind of boring, but I find it very interesting. But
Okay, okay. All right. Okay, so let's start the discussion. And firstly, like we would like to hear about your career. So, looking back at your career, what key experiences and achievements helped you to earn the title of IBM Champion and then secure your position as a consultant at Sedan Group? And then later, like you started working on it.
yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that's really impacted, I mean, becoming, the champion back in 2017, and officially, and starting with Siding Group was really just the fact of uh, open sourcing a lot of my work and being more open with the community has really done me justice, right? And I think you would agree, Amit, that there, 5, 6, 7 years ago, there wasn't really a lot of open source tooling
Right.
in the IBMI space. Of course, there was Scott Clements code, Niels Leesberg was posting code back then, but it wasn't really a community driven thing back then. And so back in 2017, I was working on kind of like some small tools here and there and really open sourcing and writing about it as much as I could. And I think that really that helped me become, the consultant at Siding Group at the time. It really did help me become a champion too, because I was trying to really find ways to connect with the community. And I think that open source is a really good way of doing that.
Okay.
So
Yeah. And I think before this, prior to this, like you have also developed one tool, iLead text editor, right? So could you please tell a bit about that?
yeah. That is a while ago. You can still find it on GitHub. IL editor. Yeah. It was the predecessor to Code for IBMI, if you like. It's based on a lot of the same code, a lot of the same principles, but back in 2016, 2017, I really wasn't happy with the development tools that we had. And so I wrote one, if you like, that just kind of did all the things that I wanted it to do. But really, it was open source. That was really how everything kicked off, right? Was iLearner really started out, and people were using it, and the community was kind of coming together very slowly back then, and that was a big deal for me back then, I think.
Okay, okay. So if we talk about mentorship, like nowadays we know even from a long time it's thing that mentorship plays a very crucial role in a career development. So have you had any mentor who significantly influenced your career, and how do you approach your mentorship now?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the past 10 years or so. I mean, it's definitely switched between people as I work on different things.
Hmm.
2016, between 2016 and 2018, it was really, there were two people really. There was Trevor Perry, who him and we would speak a lot back then, and he would kind of help me in speaking and also give me just life advice in general, which is nice.
Okay.
And then another one, his name, well, I know him as PHP Dave. And he is a consultant, but I think he's employed somewhere in the US now, and he's just very technically smart. So he would help me, would guide me in technical direction and things that I should work on. And those two I really appreciated back then. And then after that, I mean, as I said, it kind of changes through the years.
Right.
I already mentioned him already, but his name is Niels Leesberg, Danish guy. He's just amazing. I did some work with him back in um, 2018, late 2018, and working with him and his company at the time really changed the way that I felt about open source. It really changed the way that I felt about um, development tooling, mostly because he's just a really smart guy, like technically knows his stuff. He's worked on some amazing stuff, but he's also just the most loveliest person on the planet. And I respect somebody a lot that is also very caring and humble and also very smart. And that really took a big role on me. I look up to him now still. He's still amazing. Um, yeah, as I think as I've joined IBM, there's really two that there's a couple of people that I connect with here, and I think most of my role models are still kind of outside of IBM. Like Charles Guarino, I'm sure you know his
Yeah.
name, and Alan Side, and those two I look up to significantly because what they do for the community really means a lot to me. People that do stuff for the community are people that stick out to me the most, and I think that they have quite a big impact. So that
Okay.
means a lot to me.
Okay. And like if we talk about your initial days, so how you started your career with IT, like initially, after just completing your college, like how you decided to move into this IT industry?
So I actually did an apprenticeship um, for 2 years when I was 17. I started when I was 17, and I was going to college 1 day a week and going to work for the other 4 days a week. And the company that I was working for actually had an IBM there. And I started out there doing PHP, and then we did some CL and RPG training as well at the same time. And I did that for 2 years, right? Now, bear in mind, I was writing code at home, playing games and writing code at home a lot before that anyway. But then that really kind of took my career off. And after I did the apprenticeship, I did the internship, as some people call it. I left and basically went self-employed and did some contracting, and then after that, really just doing more open source work. And that's really how I started out, right? Is doing this internship, this apprenticeship with a company that had an IBM and then it kind of took off from there.
Okay. 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 So now we would like to hear about your work. Like, how do you help IBMI development teams to transform their application? We know that you provided this tool, which is code for IBMI. Apart from this, like, what all things are there through which you are helping the IBMI development teams?
Yeah, I mean, Code for IBM obviously is the biggest one, right? Like, it's sort of the base work for anything VS Code related, anything VS Code and IBM related. Code for IBM is obviously at the center of it. And then there's really mainly two other areas that I try my best to be helpful in. And one, I think it's sort of like the Git and DevOps tooling.
Hmm.
I do two things really. I speak about those two topics all the time. I'll go to conferences and talking about Git and IBMI and ILE code all working together is like one of my favorite things to talk about because well, there's so much room for growth in that area, and it's so powerful when you use Git correctly. It's so powerful, right? So I love speaking about that. That's one of my favorite things. And then the other thing that I'm currently kind of doing half time is working on a tool called Source Orbit, which is open source tooling for doing dependency analysis of your IBMI code for a Git repository, inside of a Git repository, I'm sorry. So after you've moved all of your code into Git, then IBM is going to slowly provide all the tooling that you need to do dependency analysis of your source code, which is good for things like impact analysis. It's good for doing automated builds. There's a bunch more stuff that it can do as well, but those two things is really where I'm trying to help the community is talked more about open source tooling to help achieve, modern pipelines using modern tooling like GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps and GitLab CI/CD, things like that. That's where I'm trying to have the most impact right now.
Okay.
So
And here, like in the year of 2024, if someone asks you to give advice to those, like if someone is working for IBM system, as an IBM developer or maybe other profile, so but they are not using the advanced things like GitHub or we can say the VS Code. They are still using the typical green screen. So what advice would you like to like? I know that it's a bit challenging for them because in the upcoming days, for sure, they will face some issues. So what is your opinion here?
I think that there's a few opinions and there's a few ways that you could look at it, right? So if you're still using, SEU, or I mean, even if you're using RDI, it doesn't really matter. But
Hmm.
if you're looking into using more modern tooling, or at least if you're looking at using VS Code, then I mean, as you know, Amit, there's tons of videos on YouTube, right? I've
Right.
made some, you've made some, you've made way more than I have, and that really says a lot, and I really appreciate that. Um, the videos are easily the best way to start, right? Is find out how other people are doing it by looking it up on Google, looking it up on YouTube, watching some videos about it, right? That's
Right.
you don't have to do anything, but you can just follow along or you can just watch it. That's easily the number one thing to do.
Hmm.
Second thing is, it's also an open source project. So it's easy to find. It's easy to find on GitHub. If you were curious about how other people are using it, we have testimonials, we have open source documentation, we have open source workshops that you can follow along and
Right.
do, right? So even if you were trying to learn how to use Git, there's tons of content online to do it. But the more of the story, I think, is that unlike stuff in the past, it's really easy to Google for these new things. It's really easy to find online these things, right? I mean, it's
Right.
really easy.
Yes.
So I think that's what
Okay.
I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So my next question is related to this system itself, like traditional and modern difference. So bridging the gap between traditional as well as the modern development practices for IBMI is essential, as we discussed, right? So how do you manage this transition, and what challenges do you often encounter, like while working?
Well, I think first off, we would have to define what traditional and modern really means, right? I
Right.
mean, I think if you're talking in terms of code,
Mm-hmm.
then a lot of people would say traditional is going to be your OPM or your fixed format, and then your modern, right, is going to be basically free format versions of that code, right? That's
Right.
one way you could put it. Second way you could put it is traditional would be using SEU, uh, and and then modern would be using RDI or using VS Code, right? That's another way you could put it. Another way you could put it is traditional could be, well, I'm not using Git and I'm not using any version
Right.
control, any source control. And modern could be, well, I'm using Git or I'm using a change management vendor. I'm doing something more modern to track my changes and track my deployments, right? So I've just listed three different things that could go from traditional to modern, right? It's so vague and all the different things that you could do. In terms of effective strategies, I think that you have to kind of pick which one is going to be easiest for you, right? I mean, we know that moving to Git is difficult. So that's obviously not a place you would start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my opinion, I mean, converting to free format is definitely easier than changing IDE, right? Because if you change IDE, you have to learn a new tool set, and that can take time. But converting fixed to free format, I mean, that's in my opinion, is relatively easy. So, in my opinion, that would be the most effective way to start in modernizing your general, your general workflow is use a better version of the language first, then use better tooling, and then move it into Git, right? Like that might
Right.
be an effective strategy to do it.
Okay. And the thing which you mentioned, like converting your fixed code to free code. So I think for that also, like VS Code is helping us, right? Just with a single click, we can easily convert the free fixed format code into free format. So I think that
Yeah,
is also beneficial.
yeah, there is an extension. It's maintained by a person named Brian Garland,
Okay.
and it's an extension that's also open source. It was forked based on a tool that I worked on before. And yeah, it adds you can highlight your code and you can highlight your fixed format in VS Code, right click, convert to free format, and you
Right.
can do it right there in the editor. It's really quite cool.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So now, like tools like Git have become indispensable in development. So can you discuss its importance in the context of IBM development, especially, and how it has changed the workflow? Because previously there were some developers who were not using it, Git, but now like many of us have moved to Git, and even many people have started working on Git to make their development easy. So
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
your
yeah. I
thought on this?
mean, yeah, Git is, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, it's been around forever, right? So what I find really interesting is that, in terms of IBMI, we love using technology that's been around for 20 years, right? We love using the same stuff. We don't want it to change. We want it to be the same. Well, I mean, you could apply that to Git as well. I mean, Git has been around for 20 plus years. It's not changed very much in 20 years. The commands are all the same, right? It doesn't just
Right.
change. Things don't just change. They continue to work. That's really one of the nicest parts that you should remember is that when you're learning how to use Git for the first time, no matter what platform you're coming from, it doesn't change. So you're going to
Right.
learn a new tool set, and not only is it stable, you can also apply it to any technology, any IT ecosystem. And it just so happens that it works really well with IBM source code because it's just like any other code at this point, right? And in terms of IBMI and Git, I mean, really one of the main differences that people have to remember is that, in typical change management, you would store the actual object in the sort of change request, if you like, right? You'd store the binaries. But in Git, we're not storing raw objects. We only store source code. That's really one of the main mentalities that's different from sort of IBMI to Git when you're doing that transition. That's one of the hardest things to remember is that, you know, you'll find today, and maybe you've heard this, Amit, where you have a program that the source code has been lost for, right? You don't have the
Right.
source code for an object anymore. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that is painful when that happens. Like, what do we do?
Right.
We don't know how to get it back. Um, of course, if you've compiled it with with the debug source, you might be okay. But when you're using Git, that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore, right? Because effectively Git is the source of truth. If
Right.
you lose an object, you can just rebuild it again because you have all of the history for all of your source code. You can go back and find at any point in time how an object was made. And that's really one of the most important parts is that, you know, you don't really worry about the objects anymore. You mostly worry about, can I rebuild it from where it came from? You don't lose that stuff anymore. And that's really the most important part is we're doing it for it's everything is based on source. Source is the truth.
Right.
Um, and that's really one of the something that we don't see a lot of today. Traditional IBMI developer is usually making like their own backups of source
Yes.
code. And then, doing a option 54 in SEU and comparing two members. You don't have to do that with Git anymore. You don't have to keep backups of code. It just kind of does all of that for you. Um, yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, right. So there is no need to create those save files in order to save your backup and to manage all those things. We can directly use Git to save our code. Like even it will help us to manage the history as well. Like if you want to step back to a particular position, then you can use the Git thing. So yeah,
Exactly.
I think everyone should move to this Git and they should start development with Git. Even it like later in time, like they will feel also that yes, it has solved many of the problem for the development.
Yeah. Yep. I fully agree. It solves a lot of problems that, a lot of small businesses have today. There are a lot of small businesses in Europe and in the US that don't have any change control or any change management whatsoever. And using Git, even though it is a big change to the workflow, there are so many benefits to it, right? There's
Yes.
so many. So
Yeah, initially it might take time, but later on for sure it will give you the beneficial.
hmm
All right. And one more thing I want to ask you, like your open source tools such as Code for IBM, have made a significant impact in the industry. So how have these tools influenced the IBMI development community? Like we know that most of the developers have started working on it using the Code for IBMI, right? But what is your observation, like how these tools influence the IBMI development community mainly?
Yeah, I mean, I think really one of the main things that it's done to the community is as it's kind of given hope, right? I mean, let's use a concrete example is traditional IBM releases happen twice a year, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
typical thing. And sometimes only once a year, right? There are some products that don't release that often and maybe get a very small change. Well, one of the biggest things that Code for IBM has done is that we have introduced kind of normalized releases, right? So we might release twice a month, we might release 3 times a month, even, right? But we're actively working on it and we're building in the open. These are two of the biggest things, right? Is we're actively releasing and we're building in the open, which isn't typical for IBMI software, right? Anytime a vendor is working on something, anytime IBM is working on something, typically is done, and you won't hear anything about it until June of some year, right? When they do an announce and everything is in it, where Code for IBMI and all of the other extensions that, luckily I get to work on, we build in the open. We actively work with our developers to make sure that we're building the right things. We want people to test actively. If they found something they don't like, they can tell us in the open. And that's really one of the key differences about what we're doing is we're really changing how software in the IBMI space is built. We're not so secretive. It doesn't have to be secret. We don't really know why things are so secretive. Um, and that's really one of the nice parts about open source is we can do that and build in the open and share ideas and collect feedback in a way nicer manner than before. I think that's the biggest thing we've done to the community.
Okay. And Liam, like there are still some person like who believe that IBMI is going to debt. So how would you address this thing? Like, is it? I know that it's a myth, but still, I would like to ask this answer from you. Like, how do you like? What piece of advice you would like to give those who recently started their career for this IBMI world, right? So you can, I think, debunk this that no, it's not going anywhere. So yeah, what is
Yeah,
your
I,
thought?
I think you know that too. I mean, IBMI isn't going anywhere. What I found really interesting is that um, I have spoken to more customers in the last 2 years than I ever have in my life.
Hmm.
Even like for going to all the conferences and stuff, like online, I'm interacting with more people than I ever have before, and that is quite telling. And then on from that, I mean, outside of the US, there is more and more user groups popping up. I mean, Amit, you were telling me about Common India. Well, last time I spoke to you, and how there's a common event happening in India now, and that is kind of cool. Common haven't done that before, and I'd love to see where that's going. It kind of shows that maybe there's a crowd there. And I know, for a fact that actually the code for my user base in Japan is growing as well. Like it just
Okay.
seems like all of these different countries are popping up and more people are using the open source tooling. Like there's no sign of anything going away.
Right.
And obviously, I obviously work at IBM, so I have an idea of really what is going on. And I mean, things are looking beautiful right now. I mean, I'm continuing to build open source software and people are continuing to use it and we're getting more users every year, every month. And you know, it, nothing is going to die. Nothing is going.
Okay, so I think with this explanation, everyone can understand no, it is not going somewhere. And
Yeah,
even like those who are starting their career, they can also learn new things. And they should go for the modern approach. Like they can start learning Git, they can use VS Code for the development. So these things they can adopt, right?
exactly. I mean, yeah, I was just chatting with some college students
Mm-hmm.
in Wisconsin about 2 months ago, and they were really grateful that they could continue to use VS Code with IBM, right? Like they were already using VS Code to write other languages like Python and Java, and now they can use the same tooling to work on IBM, which is
Yes.
amazing, right? That's fabulous.
Yeah, same thing I also observed. Like when a new student who just passed out from a college, they started their career with IBMI. So they are afraid of using those typical green screen. They always ask like why we can't use it on Sublime Text or VS Code, because they only know about these things. They have come from the background of Python, HTML, and web related stuff, right? So now we have that answer. No, you can use that VS Code. VS Code is there through which you can easily implement your code for IBMI using RPGD. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think it is helping a lot.
it's beautiful. You summed it up really well.
Yeah. Okay. And now, like you have been recognized with two common innovation awards. So could you share more about the innovations that led to these awards and what they mean to you?
Well, okay, the first one,
Mhm.
I wrote a Python-like language,
Okay.
but wrote it had sorry, had written it in RPG,
Okay.
a an interpreter. I know basically was a compiler, and it generated MI, OPM MI. So it actually create a program object and run it.
Hmm.
And that was in 2016. Um, and that was fun. I mean, I got to meet lots of people. I met Trevor Perry and I met PHP Dave, who I mentioned earlier. Really fantastic. And then the second one was called Barry CI, and it was really just like a toy project because, in 2017, CI/CD was kind of on CI/CD on IBMI and Git on IBMI was just sort of becoming a thing very slowly. And so I was trying to build tooling, my own tooling, just to play, just to, mess around with, just to build and see if things worked, right? And so when Barry CI won the award, it was kind of pointed out to me that like, oh, this is probably a good space to keep working in, right? And and since then, DevOps and CI/CD has really blown up. Again, that was in 2017 that or 2018 that I had won that, right? And so, the CI/CD and DevOps scene has really blown up in the last 5 years. So I think winning that really kind of told me like, oh, I probably should just keep doing this for this platform and, really give it some more attention over the next few years, which obviously is why I'm so passionate about talking about Git and such.
Right.
So yeah. Uh, yeah, they really just opened doors and connected with me with more people, really. Um, from building again open source software. I think the both of those projects are on GitHub, right? Like nothing is a secret for me, really. Um, so yep.
Okay. And modernizing application on IBM is a hot topic for sure. So, what are some of the most effective strategies you have seen or been a part of in this particular area for modernizing?
Well, obviously, when I before I was at IBM, I was doing a lot more direct customer work. I don't get to do too much direct customer work other than kind of fixing issues here and there now.
Hmm.
So before I joined IBM, I there are two main customers that I love to talk about. I won't say their names, unfortunately, but
Hmm.
one was a company that sold metals,
Okay.
and the other one was a bank. And the company that sold metals actually built a React app with a Node.js backend connecting to DB2 for I running in Azure. So again, that's the Node backend running in Azure. We have a React front end running in Azure, and we have a mobile app written in Xamarin, all talking to Node, all connecting to DB2 for I, and it was beautiful. They used some really hot front end tech to build a really nice functional application for the web where they could place orders for different metals, see their orders, see they could track their order through the browser using a trucking service. It was really amazing what that team, and luckily I got to do the back end of it. I built all the Node stuff, JavaScript and TypeScript, ODBC. That was really cool. And then the second one, the bank, actually was we were doing a proof of concept to migrate an application to Git, basically a huge part of their banking app into Git. And back in this was in 2020, right? Peak COVID.
Okay.
And luckily, I got to build a lot of the technologies that migrated the code into a Git repository and built the dependency trees automatically for them, right? And so actually, the part that I got to work on was automating the build inside of GitLab CI/CD, and that was really fun. Like those were easily the two biggest projects that I'd ever worked on, and it was really, really fantastic. Two very big experiences for me that I learned a lot on. I learned lots about Azure DevOps. I learned a lot about GitLab CI/CD, and it was great. And so your real question was effective strategies.
Yes.
The effective strategies, honestly, you have to find someone that knows the technology choices, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So, like with React, I mean, there's so many framework choices to work alongside React. And there's also more than React now. There's Remix, there's Next.js, right? You have all these different frameworks, all these different UI frameworks, and you just have to know somebody that knows what they're doing. You have to know somebody that knows the technologies for that, knows how to build the stuff. You have to know somebody who knows how to build a backend these days, right? There's a lot to it. And of course you can learn it yourself,
Yes.
but that means you have to spend time. You either spend money looking for somebody to do it, or you spend your own time learning how to do it. You have to pick one, right?
Yes. Correct.
That's my effective strategy.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all these things, because it is for sure very beneficial for those who are interested to pursue their career in this field. And now, like, I would like to ask my last question, although there are many topics which we can discuss here, but just because of the limitation of time, what is your vision for the future of IBMI and its community, and what exciting development do you foresee here?
My vision, it really is going to be summed up in one word. It's going to be accessibility.
Okay.
I think in the future, in the next 2 to 5 years, I think IBMI is going to be more accessible than ever. I
Mhm.
think the tooling will be better than ever. And I think that really those two come back to accessibility. We want to make IBMI easy to use. We want it to make it easy to deploy. We want it to make it easy to run applications on, easy to run in the cloud, those kind of things, right? Accessibility. Um, and really that has a big impact on the community, right? I think when tools and software is accessible, then it can build a community around it because it's, well, free, open source,
Yes.
easy to deploy onto, right? Those things really all play around each other. The only way that I've been able to build a community is through the power of accessibility. And that really is from open source, that's through collaboration. And that's what my vision is making IBMI more accessible. I think that that's the goal for me.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Liam, for joining us in this podcast, and for sharing all these expertise with us. So I hope you also enjoyed this session. So thank you once again.
Loved it. Thank you.